Good morning, everyone. How's everybody feeling? Woo, that's my favorite feeling. It's day 3. Did you know that it's the 12th annual BlackStar Film Festival? 12 years, day 3, here we go. Thank you so much for being here. It means a lot that you are participating in this 12th year with us. Of course, we would like to thank our funders and individual donors, as well as our network of producing and community partners. Please follow us on all social media platforms at BlackStar Fest using the hashtags BSFF23 and BlackStar on Broad. The runtime for this panel is 60 minutes, including audience Q&A, so be sure to save your juicy questions for the end and we'll engage with them. And now it's my pleasure to introduce this fabulous panel, which is a spotlight on the film Going to Mars, the Nikki Giovanni Project. Yolanda Wisher, our moderator, is the author, Philadelphia Treasure, True Gem, and the author of Monk Eats an Afro, and co-editor of Peace is a Haiku Song. Wisher was named inaugural Poet Laureate of Montgomery County in 1999, and a third Poet Laureate of Philadelphia in 2016. A Pew and Cave Canem Fellow, Wisher was named Philadelphia Cultural Treasures Artist Fellow in 2022. She performs a blend of poetry and song with her band, Yolanda Wisher and the Afro Eaters. Along with Trapita B. Mason, Wisher is the founder of Consensus, an initiative that seeks to count, gather, and memorialize Black femme poets in the Philadelphia area. To the end, we have Chris Pattishall, who is a pianist and composer, known for his wide stylistic breadth, meticulous sense of detail, empathy, and an inclination towards the surreal. His 2021 release, Zodiac, a reimagining of the Zodiac Suite by pianist and composer Mary Lou Williams, was called, and I quote, a startling achievement by the New York Times. Chris is a featured performer on a wide range of recordings from the film scores of Knives Out, Nightmare Alley, and Everything Everywhere All at Once. He co-composed the score Going to Mars, the Nikki Giovanni Project, with Samora Pinderhughes. Joe Brewster is a Harvard-trained psychiatrist who uses his training as the foundation in approaching the social justice issues he tackles as an artist and filmmaker. Brewster wrote and directed his first film, The Keeper, after a 2-year-long stint as a prison psychiatrist at the notorious Brooklyn House of Detention. In the past 3 decades, Brewster has produced and directed narrative, documentary films, and immersive media. His feature documentary, American Promise, was nominated for 3 Emmys and won the jury prize at Sundance. He's co-director of Going to Mars, as well as the director of Rada Studio, currently in post-production on a number of projects. He also has 2 children and resides in Brooklyn, New York, with his wife and cat, Tama. And now, finally, filmmaker, artist, and author Michèle Stephenson pulls from her Haitian and Panamanian roots and experience as a social justice lawyer to think radically about storytelling and disrupt the imaginary in nonfiction spaces. She tells emotionally driven, personal stories of resistance and identity that center the lived experiences of communities of color in the Americas and the Black diaspora. Grounded in a Black Atlantic lens, Stephenson tells stories that are intentionally reimagining and provoke thoughts about how we engage with and dismantle internalized impacts of systematic oppression. She draws on fiction, immersive, and hybrid forms of storytelling to build worlds with her narratives. Michèle is the co-director of Going to Mars, the Nikki Giovanni Project, which won Grand Jury Prize at the 2023 Sundance Film Festival. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, hello, everyone. How y'all doing this morning? Hey, okay, brother over on the side, all right. That's what I'm talking about. That's the energy we need. All right. It's wonderful to be here at BlackStar with all of you in this incredible panel. And I got to see Going to Mars. How many people were there yesterday for the premiere? Yes. It was really great to see it. I'd seen it online before getting prepared for this panel, but it was really wonderful to be in community with Philadelphia to see that film and to hear all the ums and ahs and the laughter. It was medicine yesterday. And it was also great to see Louis Messiah on stage with you afterwards for a Q&A. He asked some wonderful questions, and we had some really great questions from the audience. And today, if you haven't seen, there's an article about Nikki Giovanni in the film in the Inquirer, so check that out if you have a moment. Going to Mars, the Nikki Giovanni Project, is a really beautiful, intimate film. It's a poet's dream and a gift to the poet, little p and big P, poet's legacy, and an answer to the question, why does poetry matter? In its importance and scope, it reminded me of the film Bad, Sonia Sanchez, celebrating Philadelphia's first poet laureate and My Poetry Mama. These are both films that should be taught in schools and universities, which I intend to do, and enjoyed in community settings as we did last night. In your film, we see Nikki Giovanni in her garden, taking care of her okra, grown from seed. We see her seasoning and frying chicken. We get glimpses of her library with this eccentric antiques and her chandelier and figurines. We see her playing cards with her friends and her teenage grandchild, and in church reading poems from the pulpit. We also see her crying, growing older with her partner, Virginia, while confronting the aging process, chronic ailments, and surgeries. So my first question is, as filmmakers and humans, why did you choose to spotlight this Black woman poet at this time in her life? And how did you gain such intimate access to the poet, her inner world, and family, especially as she describes herself in one of the interviews in the films as not a friendly person?
I am not answering that question because I want to say something
Go ahead,
first.
do your thing.
What you also see is Philadelphia loving on some Nikki.
That's right.
You see the bus station, the train station, you see the free library, you see some amazing kids asking questions that are mind-boggling and fierce. And so I left Philadelphia feeling like, wow, I want to raise my kids here. And, but I raised them in Brooklyn. And so the one thing I wanted to say is that we come to BlackStar because it's a safe place. And we've been to a lot of film festivals. And we know what safe is. So you can push us. We're going to say some shit that maybe we wouldn't say other places. But thank you for making this a safe place and coming out to see our work. It means a lot to us.
No, just to echo what you had to say, yeah, we thank you, BlackStar. It's family and coming home, and Philly has a special place in our heart, too. And, well, your question, well, I think I'll just start with some of the, when we first approached Nikki and Virginia, her spouse, they were very open to us being engaging with them around the film, and I'm sure they did their homework in terms of what kind of filmmakers we were. But we do know that there was something that was certainly at the front of Virginia's mind, and that had to do with legacy. What kind of legacy was Nikki going to leave with the community? What else could be said about her that she could feel good about, but also that we could sort of honor? And I think it was with that sense of, I wouldn't say necessarily urgency, but this sense of this idea of legacy and of community and intergenerational sort of conversation and passing the torch on was front and center of their mind. And I think that's partially why they opened themselves up to us really documenting their present day. And so it was a gift for us that we were really grateful for throughout the 7 years that we spent with them. There was one interesting moment. well, multiple interesting moments. But in this case, we would follow Nikki around, and I think in this case, even here in Philly, she would introduce us, the crew making the film about her, and she would say, this is a crew that's filming me, they're doing a documentary about me, and they're waiting for me to die so they can finish the film. Because she was also wondering, why is it taking all this 7 years, not really understanding the kind of process that we're involved in as well when we make film. There is the funding part, but we really try to take advantage of the time to really go deep. And so those were interesting interactions. And so I think the film has this undercurrent of this idea of legacy, of intergenerational conversation, of what we leave behind. I think you mentioned when we were talking about future ancestors, right? And how much can we actually think about being future ancestors and what we leave behind. And I think it's also the case for our craft. At least she certainly has helped me sort of center that I wouldn't say preoccupation, but that idea, And so anyway, I'll stop there.
But I want to say something. It's that we met her and we weren't sure this was going to work out. Because, one, she threw down the gauntlet the first day that I'm not going to talk about this, this, and this. Okay, that's a negative check. And then she had a seizure, so she couldn't remember stuff. That's a second issue. And so we went home and we thought about it, and that is the process. The process is give it time, and the solutions come. But they didn't come for a while.
Yeah, and just one thing to respond to the idea of the intimacy and the access. We've been at this work for a while, and that is part of what we do, is this idea of building trust with the participants that we're collaborating with. And it's through that trust that takes time that then our collaborators, such as Nikki and Ginny, end up opening up their present. So we can be in these moments of intimacy while definitely setting really very clear boundaries too, that we respect, but that we then use as a bouncing board for creativity.
And Chris, how familiar were you with Nikki Giovanni's work before you started working on the score?
I was not very familiar. I was saying to someone last night, I've always been a big reader of fiction, and to a lesser extent biography, but poetry up until this point had not been an area that I had investigated very much. So for me, as soon as Samora and I started talking with Joe and Michèle, the first thing I did was go and get some collections of poetry, start reading, start immersing myself in the language and the spirit and the rhythm of her work. So for me, it was there was this added benefit of just opening up a whole new world of experience.
Mm-hmm. Thank y'all. So somebody asked this question last night, and I was a little sad because it was already on my list, but I'm going in anyway because I see some James Baldwin heads up in here too. Many of us have seen these clips on social media of this conversation between Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin, and it's from a 1971 conversation that they had in London, and it was originally recorded for a PBS series. And at the time, Baldwin was 46, Nikki Giovanni was only 28 years old. And it's kind of funny in parts. It's rich, it's deep. There's moments when he's calling her sweetheart, sweetheart, and he's smoking cigarettes like the whole time. Like there's just like a cloud of smoke hanging all over them. And there's so many gems in here for writers, filmmakers, artists, organizers, culture workers. It's a loving conversation between these two beloved, fearless writers. And I can understand why people are always sharing it. It pops up on my feed like every week. Again, another piece of it. And it's 52 years later. What was your artistic reasoning behind including those Baldwin Giovanni clips where they land in the film? Because they're kind of spaced in some kind of strategic ways. And why do you think Baldwin was particularly important to Giovanni's life and project?
Let me just say this. Baldwin is important in my life. And so he's a bright light. Imagine, because I'm a little bit older, looking at the television in the 70s, and what did you see? Black, not much. And even in the 70s, we would run, or my mother would make us run to the TV screen if we saw someone black. And it was a few people, I can name them, but Baldwin was one of them. But he always had something to say that would inspire me, would make me think in a different way. And so it was very important and exciting. Also, I'd seen I'm Not Your Negro, and that was important for me. And when we decided that one of the layers that we were going to use is contextually is Baldwin, and then we listened to it seriously and said, oh no, Baldwin's a little disappointing here. He's being whipped all upside. And so we decided to use that because our icons are not perfect. And neither is Nikki, and neither is my wife. No, I'm kidding. She's the only person here that's perfect.
Yeah, there's something you said, Joe, just now that made me think about your question about there is something, there's a kindred spirit between the two of them. What you were talking about, Baldwin, somehow looking at society, looking at the world in this different way that opens something up for us to see things differently, is all of Nikki's work as well. And so I definitely see that kindred sort of spirit between them, but they were also really, really deep friends that you also get in the conversation. He was like an uncle to Nikki's son. And so there's also that sort of quasi-familial relationship that exists as well. In terms of the film, I was just thinking, we were very strategic in how we placed these conversations, but we were also, we took the liberty of cutting certain aspects of the conversation that sort of helped us focus on Nikki's voice as well. And this idea that, this documentary or this piece that we've done is also about Nikki's voice and how she challenges. And she was fearless in her challenge of Baldwin around his patriarchal sort of thoughts and ideas. And so those conversations were really important. And the conversations in the film also complement either the poetry that comes before it to make a statement about the time or the period or the societal commentary, and also sometimes it was a button on her personal experience, her personal lived experience that we've explored. I don't want to say too much because some people have not seen the film, but for those of you who've seen the film, when we see Baldwin and Nikki first, we're coming out of a very personal poem and conversation around domestic abuse at home and the role of the black man, the role of the black father and the black spouse, the black husband. And so it was important for us to go to the macro from the personal to make that connection. And so the conversation of Nikki and James Baldwin are about them reflecting on our actual behaviors and our own internalized oppressions. So it was, so that's what we try to do. So they're adding to their conversation, are adding to what people have seen or are about to see after. So it's really cumulative in its effect.
So to make this simple, we are having about 4 or 5 levels of discussion in the film. So we're vérité filmmakers, and vérité is glue. So that means lived experience. I'm gonna eat this chiclet, I'm gonna cook some chicken, I'm answering the phone. That keeps people attached. Then we have archival, which provides context. But we also have these heavy discussions that provide additional context. And then we're hitting you with music. And so the music for us is a grounding force. We're hinting at emotion. And it's, for us as folks of African descent, music is a part of everything we do. And so that, and I think we mentioned it last night, so we are intentionally looking at these multiple levels of communication with audience and trying to manipulate that. So if you go back to the film, I want you.
And then I'm thinking about that in terms of tradition is also this sort of conversation with each other. It's almost like, you have the call of Nikki's poem about domestic abuse, and then the response is their conversation. So the juxtapositions are in conversation with each other, and then the music and the sonoric aspect are also sort of responding to or anticipating, right? Anticipating the what's coming next or what is going to be said next.
This is why it's so helpful to see it multiple times, I think, because the first time I watched it, I was so drawn up in the narrative, her voice, the storytelling, but then the second time I was seeing that call and response, that conversation with the images, the music, it draws you in, and I think a third time I'm gonna see something else, and maybe still laughing and crying while I'm watching it. There's a lot of layers to my questions, too. There's been a lot of talk about space travel, UFOs, aliens. Everybody's been talking about that online as well and in the public consciousness. And the film opens with this quote from Giovanni in which she states, "The trip to Mars can only be understood through Black Americans." And she refers to herself as an earthling, speaking about her desire to go to space many times. And also for the need for poets and Black women to go to space. She says space travel is in our blood. I've been reading the scholar and professor Christina Sharp's work, In the Wake, on Blackness and Being. And there's a lot you could draw between these two texts, the film and her book, in which she explores the ways in which the sign of the slave ship haunts the Black diaspora. And in your film, I was struck by Nikki's connection between the Middle Passage and space travel. How did you as filmmakers and musician, composer, use techniques to bridge that space between that kind of Afrofuturist impulse and then the reality inscribed in the archival footage?
Sonically, there were a couple of layers to that. Samora and I both, our training is as jazz pianists and an immersion in Black American music. So we made a decision fairly early on that the voice and the call would be a really kind of grounding and essential aspect. And so there's some key moments where there are layers of Samora singing, and that connects, without giving too much away, there's some moments where Nikki talks about a call, the voice being the thing that gathers community first and foremost. And so we knew that was going to be a very important piece. In terms of the space and Afrofuturist elements, I know you have there's some more technical things that I can say a little later related to maybe some other questions, but we knew that we wanted to use a variety of elements that would transform, that would take a shape that was different than maybe their initial literal, tangible form, and that would be represented in those moments, that we would experience a kind of transformation of the sound itself. The sound source morphs into something else. And we use that in a variety of ways throughout the film. So it's also in conversation with the image and with the text. It's at different points in its transformation along the way.
And that sound morphs over time. Because I tell this, I said this before, but I'm thinking, I don't want Samora to sing in this film. And I've seen him sing. He did there's a beautiful piece that he did about the NBA.
Concussion protocol.
Have any of you seen that? Please take a look at that. It's only 5 minutes long. It's 1 year long of every concussion in the NFL in reverse, and he sings through the whole thing, and it's beautiful. I said, no, don't sing here, and he opens the film with a voice. It sounds like an orchestra, but it isn't. And then I realized, and actually I realized it when you were just speaking, that we kind of end with that as well. And I'm not going to give it away, but I am. So close your ears. and it's initially over the stars, but then it's kind of over a slave ship. And
Over water.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And so that is when I first saw it, without being able to articulate what was happening, my heart fluttered, and I knew we had an ending, one ending. We got three.
Yeah, I mean that's the beauty of the sonoric. I mean, there is this. You mentioned it, Nikki, talking about what kept people together over the Middle Passage. There was a hum. There was the voice that kept people connected, and we have sort of that represented throughout the film. And the importance for us is what you're saying is that you saw what you heard, right? Meaning you understood what you heard, you intellectualized what you were listening to and heard after listening to it. And that's where we're sort of hitting folks at. Like, there's a subliminal, subconscious level where we're working with music and with sound that you don't even know it's happening. It's after maybe the first or the second watching that then you intellectualize how it is that you're feeling that emotion. And that's what music and sound do. And we're very also intentional, which is why we find it important to do the theatrical experience with the film, because we were very intentional with the 5.1 surround sound and how you were experiencing. In some cases, you were on that ship. You were on that ship. And sometimes the ship sounds that you would hear were actually in the stars. So the water sound was in the stars. You could hear seagulls in space. So we were really intentional about playing with that so that it was immersive. And Joe and I have done work in immersive VR work in 3D and 3D. Yeah. And it really informed us, which is, again, this benefit of doing this work over a number of years. It helped inform us on how to really work with the sound and the music and the imagery to create a world. So we really benefited from that, some of that work we did on a couple of projects before finishing this film.
It's made me expect a lot more of the scores in the films that I watch now, because I think a lot of times it's an afterthought, right? The film gets made and then it gets a score. This felt very different, that they're tied to each other.
Well, interesting, because we were going to shoot a spaceship in Nikki's living room. And we had designed it, all the FN students at Virginia Tech had come together. We had created this green screen spaceship living room where the books, the TV, the paintings could be portals. Of course, COVID shut that down quick. And that set is still in Virginia Tech and warehouse. So now we're left with a whole different dilemma, right? How do we let you see her go back and forth in time? So we use music and sound. So yeah, I don't want to spoil it, but there's a lot of backward sounds, and a lot of that is embedded in the music.
Yeah, some of the reverse imagery, but also reverse music is about time travel. I don't know if you want to say something to that.
Yeah, there's a lot of exploring time as there's like a plasticity to time in the film. There's an opportunity to stretch it and shape it in some very imaginative ways, and that really it worked out really well, because one of the things that Samora and I are very interested in, to get maybe a little bit more technical, is like taking these sound sources, acoustic sound sources, music that is performed by a human being that is embedded with breath and life, and to explore twisting them, inverting them, slowing them down, all kinds of transformations that sometimes the end result may be unrecognizable on the surface, but it still is imbued with something, some breath and some life, some spirit, and that was a lot of what we were exploring in the film. There's a sound that occurs right at the beginning of the film, and it's like are you hearing the ocean waves from underneath the water? Is it something in space? You know, and not to share all of our cards, but the original source material is like a drum break from an old soul record. And we did this stuff to it and morphed it into this shape where all of a sudden the experience of it is a very different thing.
Wow. I want to see all the cards, actually. We're going to have to talk about this. Okay. These cards I want to see. All right. I want to get to all these questions, so let me just go in. I made this connection last night, seeing it a second time, with this quote. It's a lot of the film is talking about, Giovanni is talking about her stories of childhood, interspersed with poems. Some of those poems are narrated by executive producer Taraji P. Henson. You like Taraji? That's another good reason to check this out. Taraji, in a way you don't think you hear her in your typical way of experiencing her. We see Nikki Giovanni telling stories here in front of live audiences in Philly, but we also hear her saying, "I don't remember," like being asked questions and saying, "I don't remember," and I'm cool with not remembering. Right at the beginning, she says, "I don't remember a lot of things, but a lot of things that I don't remember, I don't choose to remember. I remember what's important, and then I make up the rest." That's what storytelling's about. And it reminded me, last night I went home and I was like, that's in Their Eyes Are Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston, where at the beginning of that novel, she writes, "Now women forget all those things they don't want to remember and remember everything they don't want to forget. The dream is the truth." This is how you know I'm an English teacher. Yeah. And I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts about this idea of memory, especially because there is so much archival footage of Black folks in this film, right? This larger sense of collective memory, but also personal memory. How did you deal with that, with memory being so slippery, unreliable, and sometimes just painful?
And I'm gonna repeat myself. White people get a chance to forget all kinds of shit all the time. And so we're just being equal opportunity forgetters. And so that's a very important concept. And our ancestors knew it. They remembered something important that happened 700 years ago because it was important for the tribe to remember. And so, Nikki had a hard life. And we don't go into it, but you can feel it. And you can see it when she talks about a poem of seeing her mother fly against the wall. And like a rag doll. but she chooses not to remember because she's surviving and she's thriving. And so we have to forget some things. And so as filmmakers, we're not obligated to tell you everything. This is not it's not a biography. Memory.
Yeah, and I just lost my train of thought. There was something else.
Okay, do you remember the first time I met you?
Oh, stop.
Yeah. Let's go.
Oh, yes, yes. With this preoccupation. Now I remember what I was going to say. The preoccupation with accuracy, right? And again, you know, our own systemic oppression, the own sort of, you know, beating us over the head on certain narratives. And I think there was a question yesterday about duty and responsibility as artists and as culture workers. What is it? And it's not about accuracy. It's really about building our own narratives where we can not just see ourselves, but you know, experience our full humanity. And truth is not in the factual, not in the factual. Truth is in our how we experience life and how it is reflected and how we engage in community. And storytelling and narrative has played that role for ages. And right now we are in a battle of narratives on so many levels that taking certain, you know, violent and conflictual, you know, measures. So in some ways, as culture workers, we have to demand and create that space to build the narratives that have not, that we have either not been exposed to or have been hidden from us, and take it over. And I think that's what Nikki has known all along. And that's sort of what we try to build in the film too. Retaking that archive, the archival that does exist, and reimagining it, or building our own, right? It's its own archival history and story that we're sharing out of our own desire that comes from that, you know, creative process that we feel.
So there's a scene where Nikki remembers going to New York, and she tells that story the same all the time. It's one of my favorite scenes in the movie. You don't see anything. It's black. You're in a black box. You can barely see beyond her nose, and so the memory is kind of, I would say, made up. But the music is so effing amazing. What did you guys do? Well, like, I know you were in Brooklyn in some back room, but like what was that about?
That, you're talking about Black Judgment?
Yes.
Yeah. That actually was a moment where, again, slight technical detail. There was a lot of the transformation aspects that I described. Those things are happening. We're doing them in the computer. And at various points, at the very beginning of the film, at various points along the way, we would record live musicians. We both, Samora and I, we are part of a community of incredible musicians, improvising musicians. And so there would be opportunities to go in and document live performances of our community. And that one in particular, I don't think we actually recorded the music to the image. I think we recorded the music on its own. There are multiple layers of the bassist, for instance, great bassist Russell Hall, and we had him do a couple of layers.
I was at that recording session. It was amazing.
Yeah, and we that one in particular is one of the more human, almost exclusively kind of human moments in the score. I will say, in relation to time, Samora and I also knew that when the film went into flashback and was archival or was historical, we weren't trying to mimic that in a literal way by making the music sound like it came from that particular time. Overall in the film, the score is drawing on sounds from all of the generations and very fluidly mixing between them. But we knew that we weren't trying to explicitly make it sound like, well, now it's 1963 and now it's 1972. But yeah, that's a very human moment.
And I think that's part of our the larger intention of not just time travel, but collapsing time, so that the past is actually very present, which is part of what we're talking about narrative, right? Building. The past is present. It's not even the past. And this idea of playing with music in that way, with the archival in that way, so that even when you see a young Nikki and an older Nikki speaking, they're both speaking to stuff that is in a way that's so relevant and to today, to what we're living through today. So all of that was about that collapsing of time.
So you kind of started talking about your favorite scene. I want to hear about your favorite scene or sequence in the film. Mine, there's a lot for me, but I love the Afro-punk, Nikki at Afro-punk, and she's getting kind of all of her flowers from all of these young black and brown queer folk who kind of like, it comes after this kind of Mars sequence, so they feel like we're in this kind of alien space. We're on another planet in Brooklyn at Afro-punk. And, and then you introduce all this archival footage where we see Mae Jemison, we see Althea Gibson, and there's black people dancing. I think there's just so much celebration in that. As she's reading Ego Tripping, which is one of, her most famous poems. That's one of my favorites. Chris, what's one of your favorites?
It's really hard for me to pick. Watching it again last night, I think there's a segment towards the end of the film where Nikki reconnects with her granddaughter, Kai. And watching it again, that one really stands out to me.
Y'all have favorites?
No, don't have favorites. But I can tell we struggled with the "Can you kill" sequence, and we struggled with it for many reasons because we knew distributors are not going to be happy with that one, and but also we had a message, and the message was "Can you love?" while she's saying, "Can you kill?" And so the music had to be ambiguous too. Mm-hmm. It wasn't initially. So no, or was it? How'd you fix that, Chris?
We gave you co-composer credit and you remixed the cue. You said, this has got to go here. And we were like...
Yeah, just to talk a little bit about collaboration. I think we haven't really talked about that, but I have to say it was such an honor, but also a beautiful collaborative experience with you and Samora, both in terms of the respect for each other, but also the transparency and the feedback, and understanding that it was really all about the work, and I think that's what allowed it to get to the next level. But that particular, we started playing with notes ourselves for that particular sequence. It was a really difficult one for those who haven't seen it, it's one of her more revolutionary, violently revolutionary poems that was very important for us to have in the film to sort of show the trajectory, the evolution of her work. And so we had to be very delicate with that treatment. And so it was one of the more challenging moments of collaboration that I think we ended up sort of pulling through out of.
Can you talk more about your collaboration as creative and life partners? We've seen a little bit of how y'all get down together. But what was that like? You also spoke last night about, fighting over some scenes and wrestling with that. How do you work through this process over 7 years?
I would say one thing. You have to remember, documentary is mostly women, editors, now cinematographers, producers. You got to be humble if you're a man working in this field. I mean, our office is and I would also say I think that's why documentary excites me so much. It's because sometimes I am honored by the viewpoint of women who are constantly informing me and teaching me. So, what's your question again?
That was my question. Yes, you answered it.
No, I think it's the collaborations that I sort of treasure the most. I mean, with my partner, and there are other ones that we have had with Samora and Chris in other projects as well. Those that have really worked are about the transparency and trust to be able to say what's on your mind and in your heart and not be judged by it. And then receiving it, right, which I don't do too well sometimes, but I gotta step away and then reflect and then come back to it, because you know that at the base of it is love, right? At the foundation of it is love. So I can hear you. You may be saying something painful, but I know that we can come back and communicate and then make that creative process and that creative endpoint even better. And that's what has always happened with those that have really worked, is about that transparency and trust and understanding we can take this to the next level. And the next level is sort of ecstatic and transformative on a personal and hopefully collective and on the group level, however, where there were 2, 3, or 5 or 6, or yeah.
Well, y'all did that. I think, do we have time for questions? Audience questions? Y'all better have some questions out there. Yes, got a question.
Hi. Shout out 50 years to hip hop, because I'm sitting over there listening to this unpeeling of the layers, and I'm thinking, it's a mixtape. So my question is, if I'm not stating the obvious, how many times did you just listen to the audio and sound without looking at the visuals that accompany it to know that you had a rhythm? And if so, what was it that you sampled that you had a problem matching, or connecting to, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I love that question. There were a lot of moments where first of all, in scoring the film, as Michèle had said earlier, there are these different kind of layers to it. So there are moments where it's maybe a more traditional underscore. There are moments where it's more vérité, and we don't want the music to lead, emotionally. And then there are moments where Nikki or Taraji are performing the work. And those moments, each one requires a different approach. And in general, there weren't a lot of moments where we were trying to hit specific beats visually. They exist, but a lot of the music, especially in the poems, was more about the cadence and rhythm of the poetry. Mm-hmm. And so that approach was one of my favorite opportunities. I think, Samora and I are both of the generation where we go back and listen to old jazz records and old blues and old soul, and all of it is filtered through our experience with hip hop. We are of a generation where it's like we are always going to hear that music in some way filtered through that prism. And so setting the poems was very much about almost primarily the cadence of the voice. I will say there were some moments where when we were working on the music initially, we were setting it to Nikki's cadence. And so then when Taraji went back and re-recorded stuff, it was kind of like just fingers crossed that this is gonna work the same way. And also speaking to hip hop and some of what I was describing earlier about the technical process and the transformation of the sound, it is also, we're using the same techniques and the same approach that, it's like Dilla or Madlib or Pete Rock or RZA. It's all very much connected and coming through that perspective. Sometimes the end result on the surface sounds a little different, but the inspiration is 100% coming out of that.
So just to add to that, we cut to music. We left our original editor. We moved to a Canadian editor, and we moved to some very avant-garde Canadian stuff, like what's Colin Stetson? I don't know if you know him. And so then there's music everywhere, and we're telling our editor, who is white Canadian, beautiful editor, we love her, Tara Long. Do you feel the rhythm? Do you feel it? And so then we show it to Chris, and because the music was work for us, right? Showed the Chris and Samora, and they says, this got to be blacker. So there was a rhythm to it. You changed the rhythm.
Part of our instructions, we got to make it black. Yeah.
I remember an initial note from Joe was like, it's beautiful, it's a little Scandinavian right now.
Too much IKEA.
Yeah.
Got it. We have a question right here. Oh, one more question? That's it? All right. You get the last question. Make it good.
Hi, and thank you for something that was brilliant. This whole festival has been amazing. It's been like the best experience I've had in public in a long time. But with that, there's so many, I guess, concepts that are connected across the pieces that I've seen. And yesterday, after the film, it was mentioned that you came across things with Nikki you didn't agree with her on or didn't like. And in watching, just a second ago, you mentioned that there was this can you kill or can you love? And to that, I see her relationship with the masculine and with her father and with Baldwin. And there's a piece in that conversation where she asks, well, why can't you come home and smile at me for the sake of the child? So she's asking, like, why can't you love me? Why can't you fight him instead of fight me? So what was it like to really discover, I guess, how you felt about Nikki and how you felt about how she feels about the world while making this piece? And thank you again. It was really beautiful. Thank you so much.
Well, I think it informed me to be more forgiving. I remember having dinner with Nikki and my son. It was very difficult because he didn't like some things that she was saying. And he's, what generation is he?
Z.
Z, Bernie Sanders. And they were going after each other. And I'm thinking, this is not gonna work. This is my relationship with Nikki sometimes. And then Nikki's spouse says, you know you love that guy. You know you appreciate him. Leave him alone and let him be. He is what he is. He's not gonna vote for Hillary. And so, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but what I am saying is, sometimes I don't care about your opinion. I don't care if I like you. I don't like. Are you going to treat me with respect and my family with respect? And I'm gonna let you live. But Chris.
But I mean, the only thing I would add to that is, as storytellers, as artists, as culture workers, working with Nikki and figuring out. Well, I'll give you a little secret in terms of what happened during our process, and this idea of really accepting the entire human being with all their flaws and what they represent, our parents, others, our siblings, our friends, while not necessarily going along with everything that they agree with. And what that means is that you have to embrace the faults, show them, but again, I come back to this idea of love, show them from a perspective of love, right? We were working with one editor who shall remain unnamed for quite a bit of time trying to figure out if this was going to work out because they came very well kind of like recommended. And we realized, oh, this person doesn't really get Nikki. She's afraid to go to certain places of where, that might lead doubt about Nikki, or this idea of contradictions, inability to stay in those complicated spaces. And I was like, you know what? I love Nikki. I love her. So that means that I can also engage with the part of her that I don't agree with. And if I can't do that, how do I accept myself, right? How do I accept my own flaws and understanding that I'm in work in progress? And that we're all works in progress and we go in different directions. So I think that's part of what we wanted to sort of share and explore. We fired that editor and worked with someone else, Tara Long and others, who were all about engaging in those gray areas. I mean, that's what art is about, right? And so yeah, there are things I don't agree with, but that we put out there. Yeah. Without also necessarily going into the nitty-gritty of the process also. Like, I don't need to know the nitty-gritty of the decisions or experiences. It's more about a complicated understanding.
Thank you, Chris, Michèle, Joe, for your work, your heart, your love that you put into this film. Going to Mars, you can see it on Sunday at 5 p.m. If you haven't seen it already, you just want to see it again so you can experience these layers. And thank you, BlackStar, for making it possible for us to premiere it here in Philadelphia.
Thank you, BlackStar. Yes.
And thank you all for being here.